The alien warship Crintal Dominion drifted through the dark like a slow predator, its long metal body covered in ridges and spines that glowed faint blue in the void. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and something like burnt spice. The crew moved through the halls without sound, their long limbs folding and unfolding with each careful step. They were the Voska, a species that had crossed 1,000 star systems and had never once lost a war. On the command deck, the ship's commander stood in front of a wide black screen filled with green light. His name was Threl Karsu, and he had served the Dominion for over 100 years. His skin was gray-blue and covered with thin scars, each one a mark from a battle he had survived. His eyes were large and dark, built for seeing in the dim light of deep space. He watched the screen without blinking, waiting for something to change. Behind him, a young officer named Vess stood at the sensor station. Vess was new to deep space duty, barely out of training. His hands moved fast over the controls, checking numbers that scrolled past too quickly for most eyes to follow. But Vess was good at his job. That was why Threl had picked him for this mission. "Report," Threl said. His voice was low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "Commander, we are still receiving the signal," Vess said. "It has not changed in 3 days. Same frequency. Same pattern. It repeats every 12 minutes. Threl walked closer to the screen. A single red dot blinked in the center, surrounded by lines of strange symbols. The symbols were the writing of a new species, one the Vossiska had only recently discovered, the humans. "Play it again," Threl said. Vess pressed a button, and a sound filled the room. It was a voice, thin and broken by static, speaking words the ship's translator had already decoded. The voice was calm but tired, like someone who had said the same words too many times. "This is Outpost Meridian. We are under attack. Our defenses have failed. We have women and children here. We beg for anyone to hear this message. We do not have weapons that can stop what is coming. Please, anyone, help us." The message ended, and the room was quiet again. Threl turned to his second-in-command, a female officer named Drask. She had been with him for 30 years, since before he was made commander. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes were sharp and always watching. "What do you think, Drask?" Threl asked. "I think it is exactly what it looks like," Drask said. "A dying colony. Weak defenses. No warships nearby to protect them. The humans are still new to space travel. Their colonies are spread thin, and they cannot defend them all." "And the fleet reports?" Threl asked. "Scouts have confirmed no large human warships within 4 light-years of this signal," Drask said. "If there is a human fleet nearby, it is small, and it is not moving to help this outpost." Threl nodded slowly. This matched what he already believed about the humans. The Voska had fought many species over the centuries, and most followed the same pattern. They spread out too fast, built colonies too far from each other, and did not have enough ships to protect everything they claimed. The humans were no different. In fact, the humans seemed worse than most. Their colonies were small, poorly built, and their ships, from what little the Voska had seen, were slow and weak compared to Voska warships. This was why the war had been so easy so far. In just 2 years since first contact, the Voska had taken 12 human colonies. Some had fought back with everything they had, and it had still not been enough. Others had barely resisted at all. The humans were brave. Threl had to admit that much. But bravery did not win wars against superior technology. "This outpost, Meridian," Threl said. "What do we know about it?" Vess checked his screen again. "Not much, Commander. It is a mining colony, according to old records we captured from a previous raid. Population estimated at 2,000. It sits on the edge of a debris field, near an old dead star. The location is far from any major human systems. It would explain why no fleet is close enough to help them." "A mining colony," Drask said, "which means resources, metal, fuel cells perhaps, and 2,000 humans we can take as slaves, or use for study." Threl considered this. The Dominion did not simply destroy every colony they found. Sometimes it was better to capture a colony whole, take its resources, and use the people for labor or research. The Voska scientists back home were always eager for more human test subjects, since humans were still poorly understood. Their biology was strange, their emotions unpredictable, their willingness to keep fighting, even when the fight was clearly lost. Set a course for Outpost Meridian, Threll said. We will answer this call, just not in the way the humans hope. The crew began to move. Engines hummed to life deep within the ship, and the Crintal Dominion turned slowly in space, pointing its nose toward the coordinates embedded in the signal. Around it, 4 smaller support ships fell into formation, forming a diamond shape as they prepared to jump. Vess stayed at his station, watching the signal one more time before it would be too far to receive clearly. Something about it bothered him, though he could not say what. He was young, and he knew his instincts were not as sharp as Threll's or Drask's. But there was something in the way the voice spoke. It was too calm, too steady. Someone who believed help was truly needed usually sounded more afraid. He almost said something, but then he thought of how it would sound, questioning a signal that matched everything they already knew about human weakness, based on nothing but a feeling. He stayed quiet and returned to his work. 4 light-years away, in a very different room, a woman named Colonel Ren Okafor sat in front of a screen, showing the exact same signal the Voska ship had just received. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair, and lines on her face that came from years of hard decisions. Around her, a dozen officers worked at consoles, watching numbers and star charts with quiet focus. They took the bait, said a man standing beside her. His name was Captain Idris Malik, and he was the one who had first proposed this plan 6 months ago, back when it had seemed like a desperate idea, born from too many losses. Confirm it, Ren said. I want to be sure before we move forward. An officer at a nearby station spoke without looking up. Long-range sensors confirm a Voska battle group has changed course. 5 ships, 1 heavy cruiser, 4 escorts. Heading matches the beacon coordinates exactly. Ren allowed herself a small breath of relief, though her face did not show it. 6 months of planning had come down to this single moment. Would the Voska commander take the bait, or would he see through it? Do we know which commander this is? Idris asked. The officer checked another screen. Ship signature matches a vessel called the Crintal Dominion. Our intelligence files identify the commander as Threll Karsu. Voska records, the ones we managed to pull from a captured data core last year, list him as one of their more experienced commanders. Over 100 confirmed engagements. Good, Ren said. An experienced commander is exactly what we want. Idris frowned slightly. I would have thought we'd want someone less capable. No, Ren said. A less capable commander might panic when things go wrong. He might retreat too early, or make a mistake we can't predict. An experienced commander will follow the patterns he has learned over 100 years of war. He will believe what the data tells him, because the data has never lied to him before. That is exactly what we need him to do. She turned to face the room. Everyone, listen. 6 months ago, we lost Outpost Meridian. Real people died there. Real families. We are not going to let that loss be for nothing. The recording you are hearing is real. It was recorded during the actual attack, before the colony fell. We did not fake it. We simply chose, very carefully, when and how to let the Voska find it. The room grew quiet. Everyone there knew the story. 6 months ago, a Voska raiding force had struck the mining colony of Meridian without warning. The colony's small defense fleet had fought bravely, but they had been overwhelmed within hours. Most of the colonists had been killed or taken. It had been one of the worst losses of the war so far, and for a long time, it had felt like nothing but a tragedy. But then Idris Malik, a junior intelligence officer at the time, had noticed something in the aftermath. The Voska had left behind pieces of Meridian's old communication equipment, thinking it worthless after the battle. When his team studied the wreckage, they found something valuable, proof of exactly how Voska sensors worked, how they detected signals, and how they decided which ones were worth chasing. From that discovery came an idea. What if humanity could use its own defeat as a weapon? What if the very same distress call that had failed to save Meridian could instead be used to lure a Voska fleet into a trap? It had taken months to prepare. Human engineers studied the captured Voska technology carefully, learning how their sensors filtered real signals from false ones. They rebuilt a beacon that could broadcast the old distress call in a way that would look completely authentic to Voska scanners, matching every detail an alien commander would expect from a true, unaltered signal. They picked the exact coordinates carefully, choosing a place far enough from major human systems to look abandoned and undefended, but close enough to secretly gather a hidden human fleet nearby. tucked behind a nearby asteroid field where Voska sensors could not easily reach. The location we chose, Wren said, is the debris field near the dead star system, designated Kessel 7. It looks empty on any long-range scan. There is nothing there to suggest danger. That is exactly why it is perfect. Our fleet has been gathering there in complete silence for the past 3 weeks, using stealth protocols we adapted from captured Voska cloaking technology. And if their scouts find our fleet before the trap is sprung? Someone asked. Then the plan fails, and we lose ships we cannot afford to lose, Wren said honestly. That is the risk. But our stealth systems have held so far, and Vossiska scout patterns suggest they trust their sensor data completely. They believe if their scanners say an area is empty, then it is empty. That confidence is their weakness. Idris stepped closer to the main screen, where the 5 Voska ships appeared as small dots moving steadily toward the trap. How long until they arrive at Kessel 7? At their current speed, the sensor officer said, approximately 6 days. Then we have 6 days to make sure everything is ready, Wren said. Every ship, every system, every soldier needs to be in position and prepared. We will not get a second chance at this. If Threl Karsu senses anything wrong, if he pulls back even slightly, the Vossiska will learn we are capable of this kind of deception, and we will never be able to use a trick like this again. She looked around the room at the faces of her officers, some young, some old, all of them tired from 2 years of a war. Humanity had been losing more often than winning. But if this works, she continued, we will not just destroy 5 enemy ships. We will prove something far more important. We will prove that the Voska can be beaten, not just resisted, beaten. And once our people believe that is possible, everything about this war changes. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Idris nodded, and the room returned to its work, checking systems, confirming positions, running numbers again and again, to be sure nothing had been missed. Back aboard the Crintal Dominion, the days passed as the ship moved steadily toward Kessel 7. Threl spent much of his time reviewing old battle records from previous conquests, looking for anything that might help him understand what to expect at a human mining colony. He found little that surprised him. Weak shields, outdated weapons, small crews untrained for real combat. Vess, meanwhile, could not shake the feeling that had bothered him since he first heard the signal. On the 3rd day of travel, he brought his concern to Drask privately, in the quiet of the ship's observation deck, where the stars stretched out endlessly beyond thick glass. Something troubles you, Drask said before Vess could speak. She had commanded long enough to read discomfort in a young officer's posture. It's the signal, Vess admitted. The way the voice speaks. I have listened to dozens of human distress calls from other conquered colonies. Most of them are full of panic, screaming, crying. This one is calm. Too calm for someone who claims to be dying. Drask considered this for a moment. Humans are not all the same, Vess. Some species panic under pressure. Others grow still and quiet, focused entirely on survival. It is possible this speaker was simply someone trained to remain calm during crisis. A leader, perhaps, trying to comfort others by staying steady. Perhaps, Vess said, though he did not sound convinced. Bring your concern to the commander if it troubles you that much, Drask said. But understand this. Every scan we have taken confirms what the signal claims. No large fleet nearby. A small, undefended colony. Old, weak technology, matching what we already know of human mining outposts. If you tell Threl you are suspicious because of a feeling in a recorded voice, he will listen, because he always listens. But do not expect him to change course over something so small when all our instruments agree. He did not raise the matter again, but he kept listening to the recording alone in his quarters that night, over and over, trying to understand exactly what bothered him about it, and never quite finding the answer before sleep finally took him. The Crintal Dominion continued on its course, 5 ships moving steadily through the dark toward a debris field that looked, by every measurement they possessed, completely and utterly empty. On the 4th day of the journey, Threl called a meeting of his senior officers in the small briefing room, just off the main command deck. Drask attended, along with the ship's chief engineer, a stout Voska named Ord, and the leader of the ground assault team, a soldier named Gresh, who would be responsible for taking control of the colony once the fleet arrived. I want everyone prepared for both outcomes, Threl said. standing at the head of the table. If the colony still has any working defenses, however weak, we will not take chances. Gresh, your assault teams will wait until Ord's engineers confirm the colony's shield generators, if any remain, have been disabled from orbit. Understood, Commander, Gresh said. He was younger than Drask, but had proven himself capable in 3 previous colony assaults. Our reports suggest human mining colonies rarely have military-grade shielding. Most rely on basic energy barriers meant to protect against meteor strikes, not warships. Do not assume weakness simply because previous colonies were weak, Threll said. Every human colony we have taken has been different in small ways. Some resisted harder than expected. I want your teams ready for anything, not just what the records suggest. Yes, Commander. Ord spoke next, his voice a low rumble. Ship systems are functioning at full capacity. Shields, weapons, and engines are all within normal parameters. I see no reason we cannot proceed exactly as planned. Threll nodded, satisfied. Then we continue. Once we arrive, Vess will lead sensor operations to confirm colony status. Drask will oversee tactical response if any resistance is encountered. Gresh, your teams will stand ready but will not move until given clear orders. The meeting ended, and the officers returned to their stations, the ship continuing its steady course through the dark. That night, in the quiet of the ship's lower decks, a group of younger crew members gathered in the small mess hall for a rare moment of rest. Among them was Vess, still troubled by the recording he could not stop thinking about, and a young engineer named Fessa, who worked under Ord's command. You look tired, Fessa said, setting down a tray of the thin gray nutrient paste that made up most Voska meals during long voyages. I have not slept well, Vess admitted. Something about this mission does not sit right with me. The signal? Fessa asked. Word of Vess's concerns had traveled quietly through the crew, as such things always did on a ship where everyone lived and worked in close quarters for months at a time. Yes, I keep listening to it, trying to understand what bothers me. The voice is calm, steady. Like someone reading words they have practiced, rather than someone truly afraid. Fessa considered this. Perhaps you are simply looking for a reason to be cautious, because caution has kept you alive this long. That is not a bad instinct to have, even if this particular mission turns out to be exactly what it appears. Perhaps, Vess said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. Do you know much about the humans? Fessa asked. Truly know. I mean, not just what the reports say. Only what the intelligence briefings share before each mission, Vess said. Weak defenses. Divided colonies. A species still learning to survive in space. I served on a ship that took part in the conquest of a human colony, called New Shenzhen, almost a year ago, Fessa said quietly. It was supposed to be simple, like this mission, but the humans there fought far harder than any report predicted. They used their mining equipment as weapons when their real weapons failed. They kept fighting, even after their situation was clearly hopeless, when any reasonable species would have surrendered to save what lives remained. Vess looked at her with new interest. What happened? We won eventually, Fessa said, but it cost us more than expected. 12 crew members from my previous ship died in that assault, more than any single colony conquest before it. I have wondered since then if we truly understand this species as well as Command believes we do. The conversation stayed with Vess long after Fessa returned to her quarters. He found himself thinking not just about the strange calm in the recorded voice, but about what kind of species could turn ordinary tools into weapons of desperate resistance, and continue fighting long after logic suggested they should stop. The next day, as the ship drew closer to Kessel 7, Threll called Vess to his private quarters, a rare honor for someone of Vess's junior rank. You have been troubled since we received this signal, Threll said, without preamble, once Vess had entered and the door had closed behind him. Vess hesitated, unsure how much to say. Yes, Commander. I do not have solid evidence for my concern. Only a feeling that something about the recording does not match what we would expect from a colony truly under attack. Threll studied him for a long moment. In 100 years of service, Vess, I have learned that feelings without evidence are rarely enough to change a battle plan. But I have also learned that the officers who notice small details, even ones they cannot fully explain, are often the ones who keep their crews alive longest. Thank you, Commander. I am not dismissing your concern, Threll continued. I am telling you to keep watching. Keep listening. If your feeling is right, some further evidence will likely present itself before we are committed too deeply. When that evidence appears, however small, I want you to bring it to me immediately, without hesitation and without worrying about how it might sound. Yes, Commander, Vess said, feeling a measure of relief that his concerns, however vague, had at least been heard, rather than dismissed entirely. Dismissed, Threll said, turning back to the reports on his desk. Vess returned to his station with renewed determination, resolving to watch every incoming reading with sharper attention than before, searching for whatever small piece of evidence might confirm or ease the unease that had followed him since the signal first arrived. The Crintal Dominion continued on its course, 5 ships moving steadily through the dark, toward a debris field that looked, by every measurement they possessed, completely and utterly empty. 3 weeks earlier, before the Voska fleet had even received the beacon signal, a very different kind of preparation had already begun near the dead star system of Kessel 7. The place was cold and dark, lit only by the faint red glow of a star that had burned out long ago. Around it drifted a wide belt of rock and metal debris, the leftover pieces of a planet that had been torn apart sometime in the ancient past, long before humans had ever left Earth. It was a place most ships avoided, since navigating through the debris field was dangerous, and there was nothing valuable to be found there. That was exactly why the human fleet had chosen it. Admiral Sarah Voss stood on the bridge of the flagship Endurance, watching through the front viewport as more ships arrived one by one, each one slipping quietly through a gap in the debris field before cutting all unnecessary power and drifting into position. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back tightly, and she wore the kind of expression that came from commanding people through years of difficult war. She had lost ships before. She had lost friends before. She did not intend to lose anything today, or in the days to come, if she could help it. Report on fleet status, she said to her communications officer, a young man named Petty Officer Diaz. 23 ships now in position, Admiral, Diaz said. 6 more expected within the next 2 days. All ships running on reduced power, matching the debris field's natural energy readings to avoid detection. And the beacon? Still broadcasting on schedule, exactly as programmed. No changes detected in the signal pattern. Sarah nodded and turned to her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man named Commander Okoye, who stood at a large table showing a 3-dimensional map of the debris field and the space around it. Walk me through it again, she said. I want to hear it once more, before the enemy arrives. Okoye nodded and pointed to the map. The Voska fleet will approach from this direction, following the beacon's coordinates. Our sensors show they are moving at a steady, unhurried pace, which tells us they believe there is no danger waiting for them. When they arrive here, he pointed to a cluster of larger rocks near the center of the debris field. They will find nothing, no colony, no wreckage matching a destroyed mining outpost. Just empty rock and old metal. And that is when they will realize something is wrong, Sarah said. Yes. Based on captured Voska behavior patterns, we expect their commander to slow down, run additional scans, and try to understand the discrepancy. This is the moment. While they are distracted and confused, our ships, hidden throughout the debris field on all sides, will move to surround them. How long do we have, from the moment they arrive to the moment they realize they've been tricked? Difficult to say precisely, Okoye admitted. Voska commanders vary in how quickly they act. Based on the reputation of Threll Karsu, the commander identified for this fleet, we estimate somewhere between 3 and 8 minutes before he orders his ships to attempt a retreat. 3 to 8 minutes, Sarah repeated. That is not a large window. No, Admiral, which is why timing will be everything. Every ship must move on the same signal, the moment Commander Malik's intelligence team gives the order. There can be no hesitation, and no early movement. If even one ship reveals itself too soon, the whole plan could fail. Sarah studied the map for a long moment, tracing the positions of her ships with her eyes. 23 warships, soon to be 29, hidden among the rocks and debris, waiting in complete silence for an enemy who did not yet know they existed. It was a bold plan, and a dangerous one. If it failed, humanity would lose nearly a third of its remaining battle fleet in a single afternoon. But if it worked, it would be the first true victory of the war. Not a defense, not a retreat that saved a few ships while losing a colony. A real victory, where humanity struck first and won. "Bring me the pilots and captains for a final briefing," Sarah said. "I want every person in this fleet to understand exactly what we are doing and why. They deserve that much before we ask them to sit quietly in the dark, waiting for a fight none of us can guarantee we will win." The briefing took place in the largest hangar bay of the Endurance, where hundreds of officers and pilots gathered to hear Sarah speak. She stood on a raised platform, looking out over the crowd of tired but determined faces. Many of them had fought in earlier battles against the Voska. Some had lost ships. Some had lost friends and family members in the 2 years since first contact had turned into all-out war. 6 months ago, Sarah began, we lost Outpost Meridian. Some of you had friends there. Some of you had family there. I will not pretend that loss did not hurt every one of us. The room was silent, listening. But today, we are going to use that loss to win something back. The very same signal that failed to save Meridian is now leading a Vosiska battle group directly into our hands. They believe they are hunting an easy target. A weak, defenseless colony, ready to be conquered without a fight. Instead, they are walking into a trap built by every lesson we have learned fighting this war. She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. I will not lie to you. This is dangerous. We are outgunned ship for ship. A Voska cruiser can take more damage than 3 of our ships combined, and their weapons are stronger than ours in a straight fight. If we meet them in open battle, ship to ship, we lose. We have lost that way before, and we would lose that way again. But this is not going to be a straight fight, she continued. This is going to be an ambush. We are going to use their own confidence against them. Voska commanders trust their sensors completely, because their sensors have never lied to them before in 100 years of war. Today, for the first time, that trust is going to fail them, and in the confusion of that failure, we are going to strike, hard and fast, before they can recover. She looked out at the crowd, meeting the eyes of pilots and officers who had trusted her with their lives many times before. I am asking you to sit in silence for days, hidden in cold rock, waiting for an enemy who does not know you exist. I am asking you to trust a plan built on captured technology and careful calculations, rather than raw strength. It is not the kind of fight any of us trained for. But it is the kind of fight we need to start winning, if we are ever going to survive this war. She stepped back from the edge of the platform. Get some rest if you can. Trust your captains, trust your training, and trust each other. When the signal comes, move exactly as planned. Nothing more, nothing less. That discipline is what will keep you alive, and what will win this fight. The crowd slowly dispersed, officers and pilots returning to their ships to make final checks, to write letters to family they might not see again, to sit quietly with their own thoughts before the long wait began. Captain Idris Malik, the young intelligence officer whose discovery had started the entire plan, sat alone in a small briefing room aboard the Endurance, reviewing data one more time before the waiting began in earnest. Beside him sat Colonel Ren Okafor, who had flown out personally to oversee the final stages of the operation alongside Admiral Voss. You've checked the beacon calibration 3 times already, Ren said, watching him work. I want to check it a 4th time, Idris said. If there is even a small error in the signal pattern, if it does not match Vossiska sensor expectations perfectly, they could notice something wrong before they even arrive. All of this depends on that signal looking completely real to them. You built it well, Idris, Ren said. The signal has already fooled them enough to bring their fleet 6 days across open space. That is proof enough that it works. It's proof it worked to get them moving, Idris said. It doesn't prove it will keep working once they arrive and start running closer scans. Voska sensor technology is more advanced than ours in almost every way. If Threl Karsu orders a deep scan of the area before he commits his ships fully into the debris field, our stealth systems might not hold. Ren considered this. What are the odds of that happening? Based on the sensor logs we captured, Voska commanders usually do not run deep scans, unless something has already triggered their suspicion. Standard procedure calls for a basic sensor sweep on arrival, followed by a slower approach if anything looks unusual. If nothing looks unusual, they proceed at normal speed. And will anything look unusual? Idris rubbed his eyes, tired from days of careful work. The debris field itself is unusual, in the sense that there's no colony here matching the beacon's claim. But debris fields like this exist naturally all across the galaxy. If they believe the outpost was simply destroyed completely, with no wreckage large enough to detect, that would explain the discrepancy, without raising real alarm. Do we know if that explanation will satisfy them? We don't know for certain, Idris admitted. That is the risk we are taking. We are betting that an experienced commander like Threl Karsu will trust the pattern he has seen 100 times before. Weak colony. Distress call. No fleet defending it. Everything matches what he expects humans to be. We are betting he will not look hard enough at something that already fits his expectations so well. Ren nodded slowly. That is the heart of every good trap, isn't it? Not fighting the enemy's strength, but using it against them. The Voska are strong, because they trust their experience completely. We are going to make that trust into a weakness, just this once. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the plan settling over them both. How is the fleet holding up? Idris finally asked. 3 weeks of silent waiting is a long time for any crew. Morale is steady, for now, Ren said. Admiral Voss gave a strong speech to the pilots and officers earlier. People understand what is at stake. But 3 weeks is already difficult, and if the Voska fleet takes longer than expected to arrive, that discipline could start to slip. Waiting in silence and cold, not knowing exactly when the fight will begin, wears on people in ways that combat itself does not. 6 more days, Idris said. That's what the projections show. 6 more days, Ren repeated. Then we will know if all of this was worth it. Aboard one of the smaller human warships hidden deep within the debris field, a young pilot named Lieutenant Marcus Webb sat in his cockpit, running through pre-flight checks he had already completed a dozen times that day. His ship, a fast attack fighter called the Hornet-class Interceptor, was one of nearly 200 small craft hidden throughout the debris field, tucked into gaps between larger rocks where Voska sensors would struggle to find them. Marcus had lost his older sister during the fall of Outpost Meridian 6 months ago. She had been a mining engineer there, not a soldier, simply trying to build a life on a distant colony, far from the crowded systems near Earth. When the Voska attacked, she had not survived. Marcus had requested transfer to this mission the moment he heard what it was for, even though the details remained classified until he arrived. Now, sitting in the dark cold of his cockpit, surrounded by silent rock, he thought about her often. He thought about the recording that had been used to build the false beacon, the very same distress call that had gone out during the real attack that killed her. It felt strange to know that her death, and the deaths of so many others at Meridian, would now be used to lure their killers into a trap. He hoped it would be enough. He hoped that when the moment came, he would fly exactly as trained, calm and steady, and that his ship would be part of the strike that finally made the Voska pay for what they had done. Beside him, in the cockpit of the neighboring fighter, his wingman, a woman named Lieutenant Priya Chandra, spoke quietly over a private comm channel, one that would not give away their position through normal transmission. "You've gone quiet again," she said. "Just thinking," Marcus replied. "About your sister?" "Yeah." Priya was silent for a moment. "My brother was at Meridian too. He made it out. Barely. He doesn't talk about it much." Marcus turned his head slightly, looking through the small gap in the rocks toward her fighter, though he could not truly see her from this distance. "Do you think this is going to work?" "I think it has to," Priya said. "I don't know if I believe in fate, or luck, or anything like that, but I believe in the people who built this plan. I believe in Admiral Voss, and I believe that somewhere out there, in the dark, a bunch of aliens who think we are weak and easy to kill are about to learn something different." Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile in the dim light of his cockpit. 6 more days. 6 more days, Priya agreed. "Get some rest if you can, Marcus. We're going to need to be sharp when the moment comes." He closed his eyes, though sleep did not come easily. Around him, throughout the debris field, hundreds of other ships and thousands of other soldiers waited in the same silence, each carrying their own reasons for being there, each hoping that 6 days from now, the trap they had built with such care would finally close around the enemy that had taken so much from them all. 2 days later, aboard the Endurance, Colonel Ren Okafor received an urgent message from one of the outer sentry ships, a small vessel stationed at the very edge of the debris field to provide early warning of any approaching threat, human or otherwise. "Colonel, we have a problem," the sentry ship's captain reported over a tightly encrypted channel. Long-range sensors picked up a civilian cargo vessel entering this system about 20 minutes ago. It appears to be lost, or possibly damaged. It is heading directly toward the debris field. Ren felt her stomach tighten. A civilian ship wandering into the middle of their operation, at exactly the wrong moment, could unravel everything. If the ship broadcast a distress call of its own, or if its presence somehow alerted the approaching Voska fleet to unusual activity in the area, the entire ambush could be compromised. She brought the problem immediately to Admiral Voss, who listened with a grim expression as the situation was explained. "Do we know anything about this ship?" Sarah asked. "Registry identifies it as the Silver Comet, a small independent trading vessel," the sentry captain reported. "Crew of 6, according to filed manifests. Engine trouble reported in their last transmission, 3 days ago, before they went quiet. It appears they have been drifting, trying to make repairs, and their course has simply carried them toward this system. They have no idea what they are walking into," Sarah said quietly. "No, Admiral," Ren said, "and if we intercept them now, bring them into our fleet for their own safety, there is a risk their sudden appearance on our sensors, or any transmission they send while we bring them in, could be detected by the approaching Voska fleet, especially if Voska scouts are running any long-range scans ahead of the main group." Sarah considered the problem carefully. Leaving the civilian ship to drift into potential danger, directly into the middle of a battle that would erupt within days, was not something she could accept. But bringing them in carried its own risks to the entire operation. Send a small stealth craft to intercept them quietly, she decided. Guide them away from the debris field entirely, using tight beam communication only. No broadcast transmissions. Have our escort ship dock with them if needed. Transfer them to a shielded vessel, and route them completely around the operational area, before releasing them to continue their journey elsewhere. "That will take time, Admiral," Ren said, "and resources we have committed elsewhere." "Find the time," Sarah said firmly. "I will not let 6 innocent people wander into a war zone, because we were unwilling to spare a single ship to guide them clear. Make it happen quietly, and make certain it does not compromise our position." The operation to redirect the Silver Comet took nearly 18 hours, requiring careful coordination between 3 separate stealth vessels, who took turns shadowing the drifting cargo ship, using narrow-beam laser communication to explain the situation to its confused and frightened crew, and gradually guiding them onto a new course that would carry them safely away from Kessel 7, without ever revealing the true scale of what waited hidden among the debris. By the time the Silver Comet was safely clear, its crew grateful and mystified by the mysterious military escort that had appeared and then vanished just as quickly, the operation had cost valuable hours and stretched the nerves of everyone involved. But the ambush remained hidden, and the approaching Voska fleet continued on its course, entirely unaware of how close their approach had come to being complicated by simple bad luck. "That was too close," Ren said to Sarah afterward, once the Silver Comet's course had been confirmed safely away from the operational zone. "It was," Sarah agreed, "but it is done, and no harm came to it. We cannot control every variable in a plan this large, Ren. We can only respond well when the unexpected happens. Today, I think we did." As the final days before the Voska fleet's arrival ticked away, Admiral Voss made a point of visiting as many of her hidden ships as security protocols allowed, traveling in a small, heavily shielded shuttle between vessels to check on crew morale and address any last concerns before the battle began. Aboard one of the larger cruisers, the Steadfast, she met with a group of engineers who had spent the past 3 weeks working tirelessly to maintain the fleet's stealth systems, adapting captured Voska technology into something that could reliably fool enemy sensors for extended periods. "How confident are you in the stealth systems holding through the full engagement?" Sarah asked the lead engineer, a woman named Chief Petty Officer Grace Liu, who had barely slept in days, ensuring every ship's systems remained perfectly calibrated. "Confident enough that I would stake my life on it, Admiral," Grace said, "which, given the circumstances, I suppose I am doing exactly that." Sarah allowed herself a small, tired smile at this. "What is your biggest remaining concern?" "Power drain," Grace said honestly. "Maintaining full stealth across nearly 200 vessels for 3 weeks straight puts a real strain on power reserves. Some of our smaller fighters are running closer to their operational minimums than I would like. If this battle runs longer than expected, Some ships may find themselves with less reserve power than originally planned for combat maneuvers. Understood, Sarah said. Make sure ship captains are aware of their individual power status, so no one is caught by surprise mid-battle. Already done, Admiral. Every captain has updated numbers as of this morning. Sarah thanked the engineering team for their tireless work and continued her rounds, visiting fighter squadrons, medical teams preparing for potential casualties, and finally returning to the Endurance as the last hours before the Voska fleet's expected arrival ticked steadily away. That night, unable to sleep herself, she stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the dim red glow of the dead star and the countless rocks drifting silently around her hidden fleet. Somewhere out there, a Voska commander named Threl Karsu was leading 5 ships steadily toward this exact location, confident in a victory he did not yet know would never come. She thought of Meridian, of the families lost there 6 months ago, and of the long, difficult road that had led from that terrible defeat to this moment of careful, hidden preparation. Tomorrow, or the day after, all of it would be tested at once. She hoped, more than anything, that it would be enough. On the 6th day, the Crintal Dominion and its 4 escort ships crossed the final stretch of open space and slowed as they approached the edge of the debris field surrounding Kessel 7. The dead star glowed faintly ahead of them, its dark red light casting long shadows across the drifting rocks and metal fragments that filled the area. Threl Karsu stood at the center of the command deck, watching the approach on the main screen. "Reduce speed to standard approach velocity," he ordered. "Begin sensor sweep of the target area." "Yes, Commander," Vess replied, his hands moving quickly over his console. The ship's sensors reached out into the debris field, scanning for the mining colony described in the beacon signal. Threl waited, his large dark eyes fixed on the screen, expecting to see the shape of a small human outpost appear among the drifting rocks. Nothing appeared. "Report," Threl said. Vess frowned at his readings, running the scan a second time before speaking. "Commander, I am detecting no structures matching a colony or outpost anywhere within the debris field. Only natural rock and metal fragments, consistent with an ancient planetary collision." Drask stepped closer to the screen, studying the empty readings herself. Perhaps the colony was destroyed more completely than we expected. If their defenses failed as badly as the message suggested, it is possible nothing large enough to detect remains. "Widen the sensor range," Threl ordered. "Search the full extent of the debris field, and check for any wreckage, however small." Vess adjusted the controls, and the sensors expanded their reach across a much larger area. Slowly, faint readings began to appear, small pieces of metal debris that could have once been part of a structure, though none of it was large enough, or organized enough, to clearly confirm a destroyed colony. "There are trace metal readings scattered throughout the field," Vess reported. "Consistent with possible wreckage, but too degraded to confirm they belong to a human structure specifically. It is also possible this debris predates any human presence entirely, simply remnants of the original planetary destruction that formed this field." Threl considered this carefully. It was not the clear answer he wanted, but it was not an alarming one either. Colonies destroyed by heavy bombardment sometimes left little behind, especially smaller mining outposts built without the reinforced materials found in larger human cities. It was frustrating, but not impossible to explain. "Continue the approach," Threl said. "Move the fleet deeper into the debris field, toward the coordinates specified in the original signal. If there is wreckage to find, we will find it closer to the source." The 5 Voska ships moved forward, weaving carefully between larger chunks of rock as they pressed deeper into Kessel 7's debris field. Vess kept his sensors active, watching for any sign of the colony, or any sign that something might be wrong. He noticed it first as a strange inconsistency in the background radiation readings. The debris field, like most fields of its kind, gave off a steady, predictable pattern of low-level energy from the dead star and the scattered metal fragments. But in a few small areas, the pattern seemed to shift very slightly, in ways that did not quite match the rest of the field. "Commander," Vess said slowly, "I am detecting minor irregularities in the background energy readings, small fluctuations that do not match the expected pattern for a natural debris field." Threl turned toward him. "Explain." "I am not certain what is causing it," Vess admitted. "It could be equipment error. It could be some natural effect related to the dead star's remaining energy output. but it is unusual enough that I felt it should be reported. Drask examined the readings herself, tilting her head slightly as she studied the numbers. The fluctuations are extremely small. Within the margin one would expect from minor equipment calibration drift after 6 days of travel. Recalibrate the sensors, Threll ordered. If the readings persist after recalibration, we will treat them as significant. If they resolve, we will continue as planned. Vess ran the recalibration sequence, a process that took several minutes. When it completed, he checked the readings again. The fluctuations were smaller now, though not entirely gone. The readings have decreased following recalibration, Vess reported. This suggests the irregularity was, at least partly, related to sensor drift, as the commander predicted. Good, Threll said. Continue the approach. What none of them realized was that the fluctuations Vess had detected were not sensor error at all. They were the faint traces of nearly 200 human ships, hidden throughout the debris field, running on the lowest possible power settings, using stealth technology adapted from captured Voska systems to blend into the natural background energy of the dead star system. The technology was good enough to fool most standard scans. But it was not perfect, and the very edge of its limitations had just barely shown itself on Vess's screen, only to be dismissed as equipment drift. Admiral Sarah Voss, watching from the Endurance through carefully filtered passive sensors of her own, saw the moment the Voska fleet's scan pattern shifted, indicating a recalibration sequence. They noticed something, she said quietly to Commander Okoye standing beside her. It appears so, Okoye said, watching the same data. But their scan pattern has returned to standard approach protocol. It seems they attributed the anomaly to equipment error rather than an external cause. That was close, Sarah said. Too close. Do we adjust our stealth output further? Okoye asked. No, Sarah said after a moment of thought. Any adjustment now risks creating new fluctuations they might notice. We hold steady. We trust the plan we built. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, the fleet continued its slow advance toward the coordinates specified in the original beacon signal. As they drew closer, Threll ordered the ships into a wider formation, spreading out slightly to cover more of the debris field with their sensors, in case the colony's remains were simply scattered across a broader area than expected. We are approaching the exact coordinates now, Vess reported after nearly an hour of careful navigation through the rocks. Slowing to minimum approach speed, the 5 ships came to a near stop at the center of the debris field, surrounded on all sides by drifting rock and metal fragments, the dead star casting its dim red light across the scene. Threll studied the main screen carefully, looking for any sign of the colony that should have existed here. There was nothing, no structures, no clear wreckage large enough to confirm a destroyed outpost, just empty rock, drifting silently in the dark. This is the location specified by the signal, Vess confirmed. But there is no colony here, Commander. Not even significant wreckage matching human construction materials. Threll's expression, difficult for a human to read, but familiar to his own crew, shifted into something like deep suspicion. This was not the pattern he had expected. A destroyed colony should have left some trace, even if small. Complete absence, with nothing at all remaining, suggested something other than simple destruction. Drask, he said. Your assessment. Drask studied the empty readings for a long moment before responding. There are only 2 explanations I can consider likely, Commander. Either the colony's destruction was so complete that nothing detectable survived, which would require unusually powerful weapons for a simple raid, or the signal itself was never a genuine distress call from an active colony. You believe it may be a deception, Threll said. I believe it is possible, Drask said carefully. Though I do not yet understand the purpose such a deception would serve. If this signal was designed only to waste our time and resources, drawing us to an empty location, the effort required to fake such a convincing distress call would be significant, for very little gain. Threll considered this. It was a fair point. Humans, from everything the Voska had learned in 2 years of war, did not typically waste resources on elaborate schemes without clear purpose. Their engineering was simpler than Voska technology, and their military doctrine, as far as intelligence reports suggested, focused mainly on defense of existing colonies, rather than complex offensive strategies. Run a full deep scan of the entire debris field, Threll ordered. I want to know everything within this system. down to the smallest fragment of rock. Vess began the deep scan sequence, a process far more thorough and power-intensive than the standard sweeps they had used so far. It would take several minutes to complete, but it would reveal far more detail about the surrounding space than any previous scan. As the deep scan began reaching further into the debris field, the faint traces of hidden human ships, previously masked well enough to avoid detection, began to show up more clearly against the more powerful sensor sweep. Not obviously, not as clear ship signatures, but as slightly denser clusters of the same minor energy fluctuations Vess had noticed earlier, now appearing in dozens of locations throughout the field, rather than just a few. "Commander," Vess said, his voice tightening slightly with concern. "The deep scan is showing multiple areas of energy fluctuation throughout the debris field, similar to what I detected earlier, but now present in far greater numbers." Threll's attention snapped fully to the screen. "Show me." Vess displayed the full pattern, dozens of small clusters of unusual energy readings scattered across the debris field, distributed in a pattern that, now visible together, looked less like random natural variation and more like something deliberately positioned. "This is not natural distribution," Drask said, studying the pattern with growing alarm. "This looks organized." Threll stared at the screen, his mind working through the implications. An empty colony. A convincing but ultimately false distress signal. Dozens of hidden energy sources scattered throughout the surrounding debris field in a pattern too organized to be natural. "This is a trap," he said, his voice low. The realization settled over the command deck like a physical weight. In 100 years of service, in countless campaigns across a dozen conquered species, Threll Karsu had never once walked into a deliberate trap. The Voska were the ones who set traps for others, not the ones caught in them. "All ships, emergency retreat protocol," Threll ordered, his voice sharp and urgent now. "Full reverse thrust. Prepare for immediate jump to faster-than-light travel the moment we clear the debris field's gravitational interference." The crew moved instantly, alarms beginning to sound throughout the ship as engines roared to life, attempting to reverse the fleet's course as quickly as possible. But it was already too late. Aboard the Endurance, Admiral Sarah Voss watched the sudden change in the Voska fleet's movement and knew immediately what it meant. "They've figured it out," she said. "They're trying to retreat." "Do we spring the trap now, Admiral?" Okoye asked, his hand hovering over the communication controls that would send the signal to every hidden ship in the fleet. Sarah watched the 5 Voska ships begin their desperate attempt to reverse course, engines flaring bright against the dark debris field. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the moment Idris Malik's careful plan and 3 weeks of silent waiting would either pay off completely or fall apart at the very last second. "Now," she said, "give the signal. Spring the trap." Okoye's hand came down on the control, sending a single, brief encoded transmission across the entire debris field. In an instant, nearly 200 hidden human ships, from massive cruisers to small fighter craft, powered up their engines and weapons systems simultaneously, breaking their long silence all at once. The dark, seemingly empty debris field around the Krintal Dominion and its 4 escorts suddenly came alive with light as human ships emerged from behind rocks and out of shadowed gaps in the debris, closing in from every direction at once. Aboard the Voska flagship, Vess stared at his screen in shock as the readings that had been small, uncertain fluctuations moments before suddenly resolved into dozens, then hundreds, of clear ship signatures, appearing all around them like ghosts stepping out of the darkness. "Commander," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we are surrounded." Threll's mind raced back through every decision made over the past 6 days, searching for the moment they had missed the truth. The calm voice in the recording. The strange fluctuations in the background readings, dismissed as sensor drift after recalibration. The complete absence of colony wreckage, explained away as total destruction, rather than considered as evidence of deception. Each small piece, taken alone, had seemed reasonable. Together, they formed a pattern he should have recognized sooner. "How long did we have?" he said quietly, almost to himself, "before we understood?" "Commander?" Drask asked, not certain she had heard him correctly amid the rising alarms. "Nothing," Threll said, straightening himself. Regret would not help his crew now. Only clear thinking would give them any chance of surviving what was about to happen. "Full combat alert. All hands to battle stations. Prepare for immediate engagement. Throughout the ship, crew members who moments before had been preparing for a simple, uneventful colony conquest now scrambled toward combat positions, adrenaline replacing the routine calm that had defined most of the journey so far. Weapon stations powered to full readiness. Shield generators diverted maximum power to defensive systems. Damage control teams positioned themselves near critical systems throughout the ship, ready to respond the moment the first hits landed. Vess remained at his sensor station, watching in growing dismay as more and more human ship signatures resolved clearly on his screen, no longer hidden by whatever stealth technology had concealed them until now. The numbers climbed steadily as his scans updated. 100, 120, 150, and still climbing. "Commander, I am now counting approximately 180 vessels," Vess reported, his voice tight with barely controlled alarm. Multiple fighter squadrons already moving to intercept positions. Larger vessels, possibly cruiser class, holding at a greater distance, likely coordinating the overall assault. Threll absorbed this number with a growing, cold certainty. 180 ships, against his 5. Even accounting for the likely difference in size and individual power between Voska and human vessels, this was not a fight his fleet could hope to win through strength alone. "Order Escort 1 and Escort 3 to establish a defensive perimeter around the flagship," Threll commanded. "Escort 2 and Escort 4, prepare to screen our rear approach. We need every possible second to complete our retreat." The 4 escort ships began moving into position, their crews responding with the discipline of long training, even as the reality of their situation became clear to every soldier aboard. This was not a battle they had trained to fight. Voska doctrine emphasized overwhelming force against weaker opponents, not desperate defense against a numerically superior enemy that had somehow appeared from nowhere. "Commander," Drask said, studying the tactical display with a critical eye, "their formation shows unusual coordination for a species we believed had limited fleet combat experience. Look at the spacing between their fighter groups. It matches almost perfectly with known effective anti-capital ship tactics, the kind used by more experienced spacefaring species." "They have learned," Threll said grimly. "In 2 years of fighting us, they have learned exactly how we fight, and they have built a strategy specifically to counter it." This realization settled over the command deck with heavy weight. The Voska had assumed, based on early encounters, that humans would remain a relatively simple opponent throughout the war, their tactics limited by inexperience and inferior technology. This assumption, it was now becoming clear, had been dangerously wrong. "All ships, begin emergency retreat vector," Threll ordered. "Full power to engines. We need distance from this debris field before we can safely engage our jump drives." The 5 Voska ships began accelerating away from the center of the debris field, engines straining as they attempted to build enough speed and distance to escape the dense gravitational interference that prevented safe faster-than-light travel. But the human fleet, already in motion and perfectly positioned throughout the surrounding rocks, moved to intercept from every direction, cutting off potential escape routes before they could fully develop. "They are closing the gap faster than projected," Vess reported. "Fighter squadrons will reach intercept range in approximately 90 seconds. Threll gripped the edge of his console, watching the numbers on his screen with grim focus. 90 seconds. It was not enough time to build the distance they needed, not with human ships already positioned so effectively throughout the debris field. "Drask," he said. "Options." Drask studied the tactical display carefully before answering. "We cannot outrun them at this distance, Commander. Our best option is to fight through the weakest point in their formation, using the flagship's superior firepower to punch a hole large enough for our escort ships to follow through, before the human forces can fully close the gap." "Identify the weakest point," Threll ordered. Vess worked quickly, analyzing the density and composition of the approaching human forces from every angle. "Grid Section 4 shows the lowest concentration of enemy vessels, Commander. Primarily smaller fighter craft, with what appears to be only one larger support ship covering that section. Set course through Grid Section 4, Threll ordered. All weapons, prepare to fire the moment we are within range. We will not survive a prolonged engagement, so we commit everything to breaking through quickly." The Crintal Dominion and its remaining escorts turned toward the indicated weak point in the human formation, engines burning at maximum capacity, as they raced to close the distance before the encirclement could fully tighten around them. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed the plan might work, the gap in the human lines still visible as they approached. Then, as if anticipating exactly this maneuver, additional human fighters began pouring in from adjacent sections, rapidly reinforcing the weak point Threll had identified just moments before his fleet could exploit it. They anticipated our approach, Drask said, watching the human reinforcements arrive with obvious skill and coordination. This is not a simple ambush, Commander. This is a carefully planned trap with contingencies built in for exactly this kind of response. Threll felt a cold certainty settle over him as the gap he had identified closed rapidly, human fighters filling the space before his fleet could reach it. Whoever had designed this trap had not simply relied on the element of surprise. They had planned for the possibility that the Voska fleet would attempt exactly this kind of breakout, and had prepared a response in advance. "New orders," Threll said, his voice hardening with grim determination. "We will not find an easy path through their lines. We will have to fight for every meter of distance we gain. All ships, weapons free. Engage any target that comes within range. We fight our way out, or we do not leave this system at all." The 5 Voska ships pressed forward into the tightening human formation, weapons systems fully active, as the first human fighters came within firing range, and the battle that would decide the fate of Threll Karsu's fleet finally began in earnest. The debris field, which had been silent and dark for 6 long days, erupted into chaos in a matter of seconds. Human ships poured out from behind rocks and shadows, engines blazing, weapons already charging as they closed in on the 5 Voska vessels caught at the center of the trap. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, alarms blared through every corridor. Threll Karsu stood firm at the command deck, forcing his mind to work despite the shock of the sudden reversal. 100 years of experience told him that panic killed crews faster than enemy weapons did. He needed to think clearly, and he needed to think fast. "Status report, now," he demanded. "We are surrounded on all sides," Vess said, his voice shaking slightly despite his effort to remain steady. "I count at least 150 ship signatures, possibly more. Multiple classes detected, from small fighters to what appears to be several capital ships of significant size. Shields to maximum power," Threll ordered. "All weapon systems online. Prepare for close-range combat." The Voska ships, though caught by surprise, were not helpless. Their technology remained genuinely superior to human ships in raw power, and their shields could absorb far more damage than most human vessels could inflict in a single hit. If this became a straightforward battle of firepower, the Voska still held significant advantages. But this was not going to be a straightforward battle. The first wave of human fighters, the same small, fast Hornet-class interceptors that Marcus Webb and Priya Chandra piloted, streaked toward the Voska formation at incredible speed, weaving between debris fragments in tight, unpredictable patterns designed specifically to avoid the larger, slower-turning arcs of Voska defense turrets. "Enemy fighters incoming, multiple squadrons," Vess reported, watching as dozens of small red markers converged rapidly on their position. "They are moving through the debris field itself, using the rocks as cover against our point defense weapons." Threll's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactic on screen. It was clever. Voska defense turrets were designed to track and destroy incoming targets across open space, where a clear line of fire was normally guaranteed. Using the debris field's own rocks as moving cover disrupted that targeting significantly, forcing the turrets to constantly recalculate firing solutions as fighters ducked in and out of view. "Concentrate point defense fire on any fighter breaking clear of cover," Threll ordered. "Do not waste fire on obscured targets." The Vosache gunners adjusted their tactics, managing to destroy several fighters as they broke into open lines of fire. But for every fighter destroyed, several more slipped past, launching torpedoes and energy weapons at the larger Voska ships before darting back behind the cover of nearby debris. Marcus Webb gritted his teeth as he pulled his fighter into a tight turn behind a large chunk of rock, narrowly avoiding a burst of defensive fire from one of the Voska escort ships. His targeting system beeped as it locked onto the escort's weakened rear shield, a section that had already taken damage from an earlier torpedo strike by another human fighter. "Firing torpedo," he said over the comm, releasing his weapon and immediately banking hard to avoid the return fire he knew would follow. The torpedo struck true, slamming into the already weakened section of shielding on the Voska escort ship. The shield flickered and failed in that localized area, and a follow-up shot from Priya Chandra's fighter tore through the now unprotected hull, causing a small explosion to bloom along the ship's side. "Good hit," Priya said, pulling her fighter into another tight turn to rejoin the fight. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, Threll watched with growing frustration as reports came in of damage across his escort fleet. The human fighters were fast, difficult to target, and were clearly using coordinated tactics designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Voska defense systems. "Status of Escort 3, he demanded. "Escort 3 has lost 30% shield capacity," Vess reported. "Minor hull damage reported on the rear section. No critical systems affected yet. Order all escorts to form a defensive box around the flagship," Threll said. "We will consolidate our firepower rather than allow them to pick us off individually." The 4 escort ships began maneuvering to form a tighter formation around the Crintal Dominion, their combined weapons creating a much denser field of defensive fire that made it more difficult for human fighters to approach unchallenged. This was exactly the moment Admiral Sarah Voss had been waiting for. "They're consolidating," Okoye reported from the tactical station aboard the Endurance, forming a tight defensive formation around the flagship. "Send in the second wave," Sarah ordered. "Cruiser Group Bravo, converge on the enemy formation from the far side of the debris field. Coordinate with the fighter wings already engaged." 3 larger human cruisers, ships that had been hidden much further back in the debris field, began moving forward now, using the chaos of the ongoing fighter engagement as cover to close the distance without being immediately noticed by the overwhelmed Voska sensor crews. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, Vess's console suddenly flashed with new warnings. "Commander, I am detecting 3 large vessels approaching from Grid Section 7. They were not part of the initial ambush wave." Threll turned sharply toward the new threat indicator on his screen. 3 cruiser-sized human ships, larger than anything that had engaged them so far, moving to flank his defensive formation from an angle his escorts were not currently covering. "Reposition Escort 2 and Escort 4 to cover our flank," Threll ordered immediately. But the order came just slightly too late. Before the escort ships could fully reposition, the 3 human cruisers opened fire, unleashing a coordinated volley of heavy weapons fire directly at the flank of the Voska formation. The attack struck Escort 2 directly, overwhelming its already weakened shields and tearing through the hull in several places. Explosions rippled along the length of the Voska escort ship as internal systems failed one after another. Within moments, the ship's main power core lost containment, and Escort 2 broke apart in a bright flash of light and debris. "Escort 2 is destroyed," Vess reported, his voice tight with growing alarm. "All hands lost." Threll felt the loss like a physical blow, though he did not allow it to show on his face. In 100 years of service, he had lost individual soldiers before, had lost small vessels in skirmishes across the years, but he had never lost an entire ship, with its full crew, in the opening moments of an engagement. "Focus all remaining escorts on the new threat," he ordered. "The flagship will handle the fighter screen directly." The remaining 3 Voska ships adjusted their formation, splitting their attention between the persistent fighter attacks and the newly arrived cruiser threat. It was a difficult balance to maintain, and Threll could feel the situation slipping further from his control with each passing minute. Drask approached him quietly amid the chaos of the command deck. "Commander, our shields are holding for now, but we are taking damage faster than we can repair it. If this continues, we will not survive long enough to complete a retreat." "What is the status of our jump drive?" Threll asked. "Charging, but slowly," Drask reported. "The debris field's dense gravitational interference is disrupting the charge sequence. We estimate at least 10 more minutes before we can safely engage faster than light travel." 10 minutes, Threll repeated grimly. Based on the rate of damage his fleet was taking, he was not certain they had 10 minutes to spare. "Commander," Vess called out suddenly. "Additional human vessels detected. This time, larger capital ships, approaching from the opposite direction of the debris field." Threll looked at the screen and saw exactly what Vess was reporting. Several massive human warships, clearly capital-class vessels far larger than anything the Voska had previously observed from human forces, were now converging on their position from yet another angle. "How many capital ships in total?" Threll demanded. "I count 5, possibly 6, Vess said. including what appears to be a command vessel, larger than the others, likely serving as their fleet flagship. This was not simply an ambush of small fighters and a few cruisers. This was an entire battle fleet, carefully hidden and perfectly coordinated, designed specifically to trap and destroy exactly the kind of force the Voska had sent to investigate the false distress signal. Threll's mind raced through the tactical possibilities. Retreat was becoming increasingly difficult with each passing minute, as more and more human forces revealed themselves and closed the distance around his remaining ships. Standing to fight was equally dangerous, given the sheer number of vessels now arrayed against them. All ships, concentrate fire on the nearest capital ship, Threll ordered, deciding that their best chance lay in attempting to break a hole in the encirclement before it could fully close. We will attempt to punch through their formation toward open space, away from the densest concentration of enemy vessels. The 3 remaining Voska ships turned their combined weapons toward the closest of the approaching human capital ships, unleashing powerful energy beams that lit up the darkness of the debris field with brilliant streaks of light. The human ship's shields flared brightly under the assault, holding for now, but visibly straining under the concentrated firepower. Aboard that ship, a cruiser called the Valiant, Captain Elena Reyes gripped the arms of her command chair as the vessel shuddered under the weight of enemy fire. "Shields at 60% and dropping," her tactical officer reported. "They're focusing everything on us." "Hold position," Elena ordered. "Return fire. Full spread. Do not let them find a gap to escape through." The Valiant's own weapons answered the Voska assault, adding to the growing storm of energy fire crossing the debris field from multiple directions at once. Around the flagship, other human capital ships continued closing the distance, adding their own weapons to the fight and further tightening the encirclement around the desperate Voska formation. Back aboard the Crintal Dominion, Threll watched as his attempt to break through met fierce resistance, the human ship absorbing damage without breaking formation, its own return fire beginning to chip away at his own vessel's shields in turn. "Shields at 40%, Vess reported, his voice growing increasingly strained. "We are not breaking through, Commander. Their formation is holding." Threll stared at the tactical display, watching as more and more human ships arrived from every direction, forming an ever-tightening ring around his rapidly diminishing fleet. What had begun as a simple mission to conquer an undefended mining colony had transformed, in the span of less than an hour, into a desperate fight for survival, against a force far larger and more coordinated than anything Voska intelligence had believed humans capable of assembling. For the first time in 100 years of service, Threll Karsu began to understand, with growing certainty, that he might not survive this battle at all. Aboard the Valiant, Captain Elena Reyes watched the tactical display as the Voska flagship continued attempting to punch through the human formation, its weapons fire concentrated and desperate. Her own ship had taken significant damage absorbing that assault, but the formation had held, exactly as planned. "Shields at 45%, her tactical officer reported. "Hull integrity holding, but we've lost 2 secondary weapon batteries on the port side." "Keep the line," Elena ordered. "Admiral Voss needs this formation to hold until the rest of the fleet can close the distance completely." Nearby, the second wave of human fighters continued their harassing attacks against the Vossiska formation, darting in and out of the debris field's cover, launching torpedoes and quickly retreating, before enemy point defense systems could target them effectively. Marcus Webb had already expended 2 of his 4 torpedoes, both scoring hits against the weakening shields of the Voska escort ships. "Marcus, watch your 6. Priya's voice crackled over the comm as a burst of defensive fire from the Voska flagship narrowly missed his fighter, close enough that his shield indicators flickered briefly from the near miss. "Copy, pulling back behind the debris," Marcus replied, banking hard and slipping his fighter behind a large chunk of rock, just as another volley of fire streaked past, where he had been moments before. The battle continued to intensify, as more human ships arrived, to reinforce the tightening encirclement. Admiral Voss watched from the Endurance as her forces methodically closed every avenue of escape the Voska fleet attempted to find. Each breakout effort met with prepared countermeasures that had been planned weeks in advance during the long briefings back at Fleet Command. "Their attempted breakout through Grid 4 has failed," Okoye reported. "They are now attempting to concentrate fire on the Valiant, likely hoping to break through by destroying our strongest defensive point." "Reinforce the Valiant's position," Sarah ordered. Send Cruiser Group Charlie to add their firepower to that section. I want that ship to hold. 2 more human cruisers began moving to support the Valiant, adding their weapons to the already fierce defense of that section of the formation. The additional firepower proved decisive, as the concentrated Voska assault began to falter under the weight of return fire from multiple angles at once. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, Threll watched with mounting frustration as his fleet's attempt to break through the reinforced human position began to fail. Divert power from the aft shields to weapons, he ordered. We commit fully to breaking this position, or we do not break through at all. Commander, diverting aft shield power will leave our rear completely exposed, Drask warned. If any enemy vessel gets behind us, we will have no defense against it. I am aware of the risk, Threll said, but holding back now guarantees failure just as certainly. We commit fully, or we accept that we will not leave this system. The order was given, and the Crintal Dominion's weapons flared with renewed intensity, the concentrated fire tearing through the Valiant's already weakened shields and beginning to score direct hits against the human cruiser's hull. Shields failing on the Valiant, Okoye reported urgently, 20% and dropping fast. Elena Reyes gripped her command chair as her ship shuddered under the renewed assault. Divert all remaining power to forward shields. We hold this position no matter what. But even as she gave the order, warning systems throughout her ship began flashing red, indicating critical damage approaching several key systems. The Valiant would not be able to withstand this level of concentrated fire much longer. It was at this moment that the exposed rear of the Voska flagship, stripped of its shield protection to fuel the desperate offensive, became a target too valuable to ignore. A squadron of human fighters that had been screening the far side of the formation, previously held in reserve for exactly this kind of opportunity, received new orders from the Endurance. All reserve fighter squadrons, converge on the enemy flagship's rear approach, Sarah ordered. Their aft shields are down. Hit them now, before they can recover. Marcus Webb's squadron, along with 2 others that had been holding position further back in the debris field, surged forward toward the newly exposed rear of the Crintal Dominion, weapons already charging for the strike that might finally turn the tide of the battle in humanity's favor. Multiple fighter squadrons converging on our rear approach, Vess reported urgently, his voice rising with alarm as he recognized the danger. Commander, our aft shields are still down from the power diversion. We have no defense against this attack. Threll faced an impossible choice in that moment. Restoring aft shields would mean diverting power away from the weapons currently pressing their advantage against the Valiant, likely allowing that human cruiser to recover and reinforce its position. But leaving the aft exposed invited a strike that could prove devastating to his already weakened ship. Restore aft shields immediately, he ordered, recognizing that survival now outweighed the possibility of breaking through. All weapons, target the incoming fighter squadrons. The order came too late to fully protect the ship. As Voska point defense systems scrambled to respond to the new threat, the first wave of human fighters released their remaining torpedoes directly into the exposed rear section of the Crintal Dominion, striking home before shields could be restored to meaningful strength. The explosions rocked the entire ship, throwing crew members from their stations and causing several critical systems throughout the aft section to fail simultaneously. Warning lights flooded the command deck as damage reports began pouring in from every direction. Major hull breach in sections 12 through 15, Vess reported, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the chaos. Engine room reporting reduced output. We have lost approximately 30% of our total power generation capacity. Threll felt the ship shudder beneath him, the vibration of the impacts still traveling through the deck plating even after the immediate explosions had subsided. This was the moment, he realized, that would determine whether his ship survived this battle at all. Status of jump drive, he demanded. Still charging, Commander, Vess reported, checking the readings, despite the damage affecting several of his displays. Reduced power generation is slowing the charge rate significantly. Current estimate is 6 minutes until we can safely engage, assuming no further damage to relevant systems. 6 minutes. Threll looked at the tactical display, watching as human forces continued to press their advantage from every direction, sensing perhaps that the battle had reached its decisive moment. His fleet, already reduced from 5 ships to a desperate, damaged core, would need to survive 6 more minutes of concentrated assault if they hoped to escape this trap at all. All remaining weapons, Concentrate fire on any target that threatens our jump drive systems directly, Threll ordered. We protect what we need to escape, and we accept whatever damage comes to everything else. The battle continued to rage around the crippled Voska flagship, every passing second bringing both fleets closer to whatever outcome the next few critical minutes would decide. The battle had raged for nearly 40 minutes now, and the debris field around Kessel 7 had become a graveyard of scattered wreckage and dying light. Escort 2 had already been destroyed in the opening minutes of the fight. Now Escort 4 drifted powerless nearby, its engines dead, its weapons silent, though it had not yet been fully destroyed. Aboard the Crintal Dominion, the command deck had grown tense with the sounds of alarms and shouted reports. Threll Karsu stood at the center of it all, his gray-blue skin now marked with a thin line of dark blood from a cut above his brow, caused when a piece of the ceiling had fallen loose during an earlier hit to the ship's upper hull. Shields at 15%, Vess reported, his voice hoarse from shouting over the noise of the bridge for the past half hour. Jump drive charge is at 80%, Commander. 3 more minutes until we can attempt faster-than-light travel. 3 minutes, Threll repeated. He was not certain the ship would survive 3 more minutes of this kind of sustained assault. Around them, human ships continued to close the distance, their coordinated fire chipping away steadily at what remained of the Voska fleet's defenses. Escort 3 has lost all weapons capability, Drask reported from her station. They are requesting permission to attempt an independent breakout toward open space. Threll considered the request only briefly. If Escort 3 could not fight, keeping it in formation only meant it would be destroyed alongside the flagship without contributing anything further to the battle. Permission granted. Good luck to them. Escort 3 broke away from the tight formation, its engines flaring as it attempted to punch through a thinner section of the human encirclement, away from the main concentration of enemy capital ships. For a brief moment, it looked as though the maneuver might succeed, the damaged ship weaving between smaller human fighters and slipping past the edge of the debris field. Then 2 human cruisers adjusted course, cutting off its escape route, and a concentrated volley of fire tore through the fleeing ship's weakened hull. Escort 3 broke apart in a burst of light, joining Escort 2 in the growing field of wreckage. Escort 3 has been destroyed, Vess reported quietly. Threll absorbed this news with the same grim control he had maintained throughout the battle, though inside, he felt the weight of every loss pressing down on him. 2 of his 4 escorts were gone now. Escort 4 remained powerless but intact, drifting somewhere behind them. Only the flagship itself, the Crintal Dominion, still fought on with any real capability remaining. Jump drive status, Threll demanded. 95% charged, Vess said. 1 minute remaining, Commander. Focus all remaining shield power toward our forward arc, Threll ordered. We will hold as long as we can, then jump the moment the drive is ready, regardless of our position. The ship's remaining systems redirected power as ordered, strengthening the forward shields even as the rear and side shields grew dangerously thin. Human weapons fire continued to strike the ship from multiple angles, and warning lights flashed steadily across every console on the bridge. Aboard the Endurance, Admiral Sarah Voss watched the battle's progress with careful attention, tracking the Voska flagship's remaining systems through detailed sensor readings relayed from the ships closest to the fight. Their jump drive is close to fully charged, Okoye reported. If they manage to activate it before we destroy them, the flagship will escape. Sarah considered this for a moment. The battle had already achieved most of what they had hoped for. 2 enemy ships destroyed outright, a 3rd disabled and likely to be captured or destroyed shortly, and now only the flagship and 1 crippled escort remaining. Even if the flagship managed to escape, the operation would still stand as the most significant victory humanity had achieved in the entire war so far. But there was value, real strategic value, in preventing that escape if possible. If Threll Karsu returned to Voska Command with knowledge of what had happened here, the enemy might learn to be more cautious, more suspicious of future human deceptions. If the flagship was destroyed entirely, along with all its data and its experienced commander, that lesson would be lost to the Voska completely. Concentrate everything we have on the flagship, Sarah ordered. All fighters, all cruisers, redirect fire immediately. We do not let that ship jump away. The order went out across the fleet, and every available weapon that could bear on the Crintal Dominion opened fire simultaneously. The already weakened forward shields of the Voska flagship began to buckle under the sudden increase in incoming fire, flickering rapidly as the ship's systems struggled to compensate. "Shields failing," Vess reported, his voice rising with urgent alarm. "30 seconds until jump drive is fully charged, Commander. But our shields will not last that long at this rate of damage." Threll gripped the edge of his command console tightly, watching the countdown on his screen tick down with agonizing slowness. 10 seconds. The forward shields failed completely, and the first direct hits began striking the ship's actual hull, sending violent shudders through the entire vessel. 5 seconds. An explosion rocked the lower decks, and several system readouts across the bridge went dark as entire sections of the ship lost power. "Jump drive fully charged," Vess called out. "Commander, we can jump now." "Do it," Threll ordered immediately. "Jump now, any heading, just get us away from this system." Vess's hands slammed down on the controls, activating the jump sequence. At the exact moment, another powerful hit struck the ship's side, tearing a large section of hull away, in a burst of escaping atmosphere and debris. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the damage might have destroyed the jump drive itself before it could activate. Then space around the Crintal Dominion twisted and folded, and the ship vanished in a brief flash of light, tearing itself free of the battle and disappearing into faster-than-light travel, leaving the debris field and the human fleet behind. Aboard the Endurance, Okoye watched the enemy flagship's signature disappear from his sensors. "They jumped, Admiral. The flagship has escaped." Sarah let out a slow breath, watching the now empty space where the Voska ship had been only moments before. She had hoped to destroy it completely, but she had known from the start that outcome was never guaranteed. "Status of the remaining enemy vessel? Escort 4 remains powerless and drifting," Okoye reported. "No weapons or shield capability detected. They appear to be attempting to power up an emergency distress beacon of their own." Sarah considered this for a moment. "Send a boarding party. Take the crew as prisoners if they surrender peacefully. I want to know everything they can tell us about Voska fleet operations, and I want their ship's data core intact if at all possible." "Yes, Admiral." As the human fleet began the careful process of securing the disabled Voska escort ship, Sarah allowed herself a moment to simply look out at the debris field, now scattered with new wreckage from the battle that had just concluded. 2 enemy warships destroyed. A third captured, along with whatever prisoners and information they could gather from its crew. And though the flagship itself had escaped, it had done so badly damaged, carrying with it a commander who now understood, in a way no Voska had ever understood before, that humanity was capable of far more than anyone in the Voska Dominion had previously believed. "Casualties?" she asked quietly. 17 confirmed losses among our fighter squadrons," Okoye reported after a moment. 2 cruisers sustained heavy damage but remain operational. No capital ships lost. 17 pilots. Sarah thought of Marcus Webb and Priya Chandra, and hoped silently that their names were not among the casualty reports she would review later that night. 17 losses was a real cost, a painful one, but far smaller than what the fleet might have suffered in a direct confrontation, without the careful planning that had shaped this entire operation. 6 days later, aboard a Voska command vessel, far from the battle at Kessel 7, Threll Karsu stood before a council of senior Voska commanders, delivering his report on what had happened. His ship had barely survived the jump, arriving at a friendly shipyard, with critical damage throughout much of its structure, requiring weeks of repair before it would be fit for service again. "You are telling us," one of the senior commanders said slowly, his voice carrying clear disbelief, "that the humans constructed an elaborate deception, using a captured understanding of our own sensor technology, specifically designed to draw one of our battle groups into a prepared ambush." "Yes," Threll said, "that is exactly what happened, and it worked precisely as they intended. We lost 3 of 5 ships. I estimate their fleet size at close to 200 vessels, hidden with a level of coordination and technical sophistication we did not believe the humans possessed." The council murmured among themselves, clearly troubled by this report. For 2 years, the war against humanity had progressed exactly as expected, a straightforward campaign of conquest against a technologically inferior species. This report suggested something far more concerning, that humanity was learning, adapting, and developing capabilities that Voska intelligence had failed to anticipate. "What do you recommend?" the senior commander asked finally. Threll considered his answer carefully before speaking. I recommend we no longer treat human signals, human wreckage, or human colonies as simple, predictable targets. I recommend increased caution in all future engagements, particularly regarding any distress signals or apparent weaknesses that seem too convenient. And I recommend we begin taking this war, and this species, far more seriously than we have until now. The council fell silent, absorbing the weight of what Threll was telling them. For the first time since first contact, the Voska Dominion was being forced to consider the possibility that their conquest of human space might not be the simple, guaranteed victory they had assumed it would be. Back at Kessel 7, in the days following the battle, Admiral Sarah Voss stood once more on the bridge of the Endurance, reviewing the final reports of the engagement with Colonel Ren Okafor and Captain Idris Malik beside her. The captured Voska escort ship had yielded valuable information, including detailed data on enemy fleet movements and technology that human engineers were already beginning to study. The word will spread, Ren said, watching the last of the salvage operations complete through the viewport. Not just among the Voseska, among our own people too. Word of a real victory, the first one where we struck first and won. It won't win the war by itself, Sarah said. One battle, even a good one, is not the same as ending a conflict that has already cost us so much. No, Idris agreed, but it proves something important. It proves the Voska can be beaten, if we are patient enough, and clever enough, to find the right moment. That knowledge alone is worth more than the ships we destroyed today. Sarah looked out at the debris field, now quiet again after days of intense battle, the wreckage of 2 Voska warships drifting silently among the ancient rocks that had given them cover. Somewhere out there, in the vast dark reaches of space, the war would continue, and there would be more battles, more losses, and more difficult choices ahead. But for the first time in 2 long years, humanity had shown that it was not simply a species to be conquered without a fight. It had shown patience, cleverness, and the willingness to turn its own losses into weapons against an enemy that had believed itself unstoppable. Send word to Fleet Command, Sarah said finally. Tell them Kessel 7 is secure, and tell them we are ready to plan the next move. This war is far from over, but today, for the first time, we proved that we can win it. As the Endurance and the rest of the human fleet began preparing to depart the debris field, leaving behind the wreckage of a battle that would be remembered for years to come, word of the victory at Kessel 7 began to spread across human space, from the crowded stations near Earth, to the smallest, most distant colonies still fighting to survive. And in every place that heard the story, a small flicker of hope grew a little brighter, the quiet belief that perhaps, against all odds, humanity might yet find a way to win. Aboard the disabled Voska escort ship, Escort 4, the boarding operation proceeded carefully, under Admiral Voss's direct orders. A team of Marines, led by a seasoned officer named Lieutenant Commander Diane Foster, approached the powerless vessel in a small shuttle, weapons ready, but hoping the encounter would not require their use. This is Lieutenant Commander Foster of the human fleet vessel Endurance. She broadcast toward the drifting ship, using a translation program built from data gathered over 2 years of intercepted Voska communications. Your ship is disabled and surrounded. We are offering the chance to surrender peacefully. Resistance will not change the outcome of this engagement, but surrender will ensure the safety of your crew. There was a long pause before a response came through, the voice heavily accented but understandable. This is Sub-Commander Werrell of Escort 4. Our weapons are disabled. Our shields are gone. We have no ability to resist, regardless of our wishes on the matter. Then we ask you to power down remaining systems and prepare for boarding, Foster replied. No harm will come to your crew if you cooperate. Another pause, longer this time. We surrender. My crew's survival matters more to me than a pointless death in service of a battle already lost. The boarding proceeded without incident, and Foster's team secured the ship's remaining systems, including a partially intact data core that would later provide human intelligence analysts with valuable insight into Voska fleet communication protocols and standard operating procedures. The 23 surviving crew members of Escort 4 were transferred to holding quarters aboard a human support vessel, becoming the first sizable group of Voska prisoners taken alive since the war began. Sub-Commander Werrell, in the days that followed, proved surprisingly willing to speak with human intelligence officers, motivated by a mixture of professional curiosity and what seemed to be genuine respect for the tactical achievement that had defeated his fleet. "You must understand," he told Idris Malik during one of their early conversations, conducted through careful translation. "The Voska Dominion has fought many species across many centuries. None have done what you did here. None have understood us well enough to turn our own confidence against us so precisely. How do you think your command will respond to this defeat?" Idris asked. Yrel considered the question carefully. "There will be anger, certainly. And there will be caution, born from anger, which is often more dangerous than anger alone. I expect the Dominion will reconsider how it approaches human colonies and human signals in the future. Whether that reconsideration helps you or simply makes the war more difficult in different ways, I cannot say." This information, along with everything else gathered from Escort 4's crew and data systems, was compiled into a detailed report that made its way up through Human Fleet Command over the following weeks, eventually reaching the highest levels of human military and civilian leadership responsible for directing the overall war effort. 3 weeks after the battle at Kessel 7, Admiral Sarah Voss stood before a gathering of senior fleet commanders and civilian leadership representatives at a secure briefing facility near Earth, presenting the full results of the operation for the first time to an audience beyond those directly involved in its planning and execution. "The operation achieved every major objective we set out to accomplish," she said, standing before a large display showing the battle's key moments. 2 enemy warships destroyed outright, 1 captured intact, along with 23 prisoners, and a partially recovered data core, containing valuable intelligence. The enemy flagship escaped, but sustained damage severe enough that our analysts estimate it required extensive repairs before returning to active service. "And our own losses?" asked a civilian representative near the front of the room, an older man named Director Chen, who oversaw much of humanity's wartime resource allocation. 17 pilots killed in action, Sarah said. 2 cruisers sustained significant damage, requiring repair, though both remain operational and are already back in service following field repairs. No capital ships lost. A murmur passed through the assembled leadership at these numbers. In 2 years of war against the Voska, humanity had grown accustomed to far worse casualty ratios in any significant engagement. A battle that destroyed or captured 3 enemy capital ships while losing only 17 personnel and no major vessels represented an almost unimaginable success by the standards the war had established until now. "How replicable is this strategy?" asked another officer, a grizzled fleet captain named Torres, who had fought in some of the war's earliest and most costly engagements. "Can we use deception like this again, or was this a single opportunity that will not present itself twice?" Idris Malik, standing near the back of the room, stepped forward to address this question directly. "The specific method we used, exploiting a captured understanding of Voska sensor calibration, will likely become less effective over time as the enemy adapts their protocols in response to this defeat. We should expect them to treat future signals with greater suspicion and to run more thorough scans before committing forces to any target." "So this was a one-time victory," Torres said, sounding disappointed. "Not entirely," Idris said. "The specific trick may not work again in exactly this form, but the underlying principle remains valid. The Voska trust their technology and their experience deeply, perhaps too deeply. Any strategy that identifies and exploits that overconfidence, even in new and different ways, has real potential for success. We should dedicate significant resources toward developing similar approaches, tailored to different aspects of Voska doctrine and technology." Sarah nodded in agreement. This victory was never about winning the war in a single battle. It was about proving a principle. We do not need to match the Voska in raw technological power to defeat them. We need to understand them better than they understand us, and we need the patience and discipline to act on that understanding at exactly the right moment. The briefing continued for several more hours, covering detailed technical analysis of the captured Voska data, discussions of how the intelligence gathered might inform future operations, and careful planning for how to protect the specific vulnerabilities in Voska sensor technology that had been identified and exploited during the battle, ensuring the enemy could not simply patch the weakness once they understood how it had been used against them. 6 months later, the war continued, as wars often do, through difficult periods and small victories alike. But something had changed in the wake of Kessel 7. A shift felt not just in military strategy rooms and command briefings, but in the quiet confidence of ordinary people across human space, who had heard the story of how a defeated colony's final message had been turned into the instrument of the enemy's own defeat. Marcus Webb, having survived the battle along with his wingman Priya Chandra, found himself giving a brief statement to a group of new pilot recruits training for future engagements against the Voska. He stood before them in a training hangar much like the one where Admiral Voss had given her speech before the battle began, though the mood in the room now carried a different quality entirely. "I lost my sister at Meridian," he told the young recruits, many of whom had joined the war effort specifically because of what they had heard about Kessel 7. "For a long time, I thought her death, and the deaths of everyone else there, meant nothing except loss. But we found a way to make that terrible day mean something more. We used it to win." He looked out at the young faces watching him, some barely older than cadets, all of them carrying their own reasons for standing in this room, ready to face a war that had already cost humanity so much. "I am not telling you this will be easy," he continued. "It will not be easy. Good people will still be lost, in this battle, and in whatever battles come after it. But Kessel 7 proved something important. It proved that we can win, if we are smart enough, patient enough, and brave enough to fight this war on our own terms, rather than simply reacting to whatever the Voska throw at us." As his speech concluded and the recruits dispersed to begin their training, Marcus stepped outside the hangar, looking up at the night sky filled with countless distant stars, somewhere among which the war against the Voska Dominion continued, one battle and one hard-won lesson at a time. The story of Kessel 7 would be told and retold in the years that followed, growing into something larger than the single battle it had originally been, a symbol of the moment humanity first proved, to itself and to its enemies alike, that even against overwhelming odds, courage and cleverness could still find a way to turn the tide of an impossible war.